a trope, a theme, sort of an idea, a recurring, trope. That was,
That's the word.
Yep, great.
Nailed it.
Hello, and welcome to SnarkSquad Pod, a media podcast where we probably have the worst opinions. Today, we are going to do something a little bit different. Before we get started, real quick introductions. I am Nicole Sweeney.
I'm Marines.
I'm Sari Riley.
So that's the first thing that's different.
Hello. I'm new and not on Snark Squad.
This week we have a guest. Sari is an all-around wonderful, intelligent human being, and she's an editor for Crash Course Film Criticism and a mostly writer and editor for SciShow, and does all sorts of things, and has lots of really smart and good and interesting opinions about media stuff. So she seemed like a good friend to come be on this, and she has graciously agreed. The other thing that's different today is that rather than talking about a specific piece of media, we are going to talk about a trope that is common in media. So today we are talking about chosen one stories. This is sort of a logical jumping off point because we talked about it a bunch last week in our Star Wars conversation, and I don't know, we're trying something out. We're gonna see how it goes. You can let us know if this was a good or bad idea. Okay, so to start us off, Sari, new friend of the podcast, what is the chosen one trope?
In a lot of stories, the protagonist of stories is somehow chosen to be the hero by some other power or some circumstances of the universe and the world in which they live. They're the only person who's capable of mastering a specific task or defeating a certain enemy, and usually this comes with cool hair or a cool scar or like cool powers that no one else gets in the story for usually unexplained reasons, sometimes explained reasons.
I really hope you have brought an example of cool hair.
I don't, because I haven't watched a lot of anime, but I know that's a trope in anime where like the person with pink hair is the protagonist,
Okay.
and everyone else has like blonde or brown hair, and you know they're not important.
They have not been chosen because they don't have pink hair.
Yep.
Oh man, I was really looking forward to hearing this story about why hair color designated one's chosenness.
But yeah, that's basically the gist of it. It's someone who is at the center of the story, willing or unwilling because of circumstances outside of their control. And they are the one who moves the plot forward and is at the center of a lot of the conflict, and a lot of the character growth revolves around them in some way.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, you nailed it. Okay, so with that definition of what a chosen one is, I'm curious for both of you if this is a trope that you generally like to see in media or dislike.
I am usually a fan of it, though in getting ready to come have this conversation, it occurred to me that I'm not entirely clear on how much I just actively enjoy this trope, or that I happen to actively enjoy so many stories that have been built around it and did other interesting things with it. So I don't have like a concrete answer to that, but I feel like that is something that I'm gonna sort out today as we have this conversation.
Yeah, I feel like in doing whatever research and reflection I did to prepare for this conversation, I came across a similar thing where I think I like it when people use the trope in interesting ways. And I feel that way about a lot of stories. Like if they take something that is an easily identifiable trope and then put a twist on it, or build out the characters in such a way that I relate to them or can think critically about the story or something like that, that's when I really enjoy it. And I think there are a lot of pieces of media that I've grown up with that have done interesting things with the chosen one story that I just like grew up with, so I care about them a lot, whether or not they're good or whatever. I can think of a lot of examples that I like with the chosen one trope, but also there are a few intersections between this and other tropes that I really, really hate that I identified in thinking about it. Yeah. So I'm excited to talk about both of those things and figure out where I land.
I think for me, I love this trope, or I came to my preparation for this episode thinking that I loved this trope or having a general feeling that I did. And they're fundamentally, I really do enjoy this trope because I love this idea of somebody just discovering this power or this destiny and having to deal with the fallout. As I was going through and thinking of like examples and times I've come across it, I realized that I don't have as many as I thought I would. So I feel like I enjoy this trope more in theory than in practice. I feel like we each learned something about the chosen one trope. Like we had ideas about how much we enjoyed it. And then as soon as we were looking into it, there was this moment of, wait, maybe not. Or there are some areas where we can definitely talk about pitfalls for how this trope is employed in media.
Most of the examples that I came up with of this trope, of things that I really loved, were usually examples that played with it in some way, and there was some measure of like subversion of the trope, which is also, that is probably generally a thing that I enjoy. Aha, here is trope, and then here is fun way that we turn the trope on its head. So maybe that's also part of what's going on here, is that there's lots of ways that you can kind of poke at it. I find that very, very interesting. I think it is just such a classic thing. And what you were saying about the idea of just sort of discovering that like there's something special about you that is obviously inherently relatable and, ordinary kid, but then ta-da, you're magic for some reason or another. And I think that is part of why the trope endures and why it is one that people keep coming back to. And also why it is hard to make a blanket statement about liking it or disliking it, because it is so simple that there are so many different ways that you can deploy it, that it is hard to say like it is on its own good or bad, because you can do so many different things with it, and so it can be deployed either effectively or ineffectively.
I guess the question then really is, so there are certain tropes that when you hear that they're being used in media, you come, like we were talking about in last episode, with all your baggage prepared to hate it.
Uh-huh.
And the chosen one is not that trope for me. If I know it's a chosen one narrative, like I'm there like, yep, let's go. I'm going to eat this up. It's going to be great. I am ready to consume it. So it's definitely not one that I come to prepared to encounter negatively. It's one that I'm excited for, even though I know that it can be overused.
I think, like you were saying, Nicole, it really capitalizes on that feeling like everyone wants to be special and everyone likes to think of themselves as the hero of their own story. And the chosen one trope, when used well, is a way that it can empower anyone. Like, I could be a wizard or the one chosen to go on a quest, because oftentimes the protagonists of these stories don't know that they're special to start with, but through their journey or through whatever quest has been thrust upon them, they end up discovering a lot about themselves. And that's like an inherently exciting thing in fiction, is to see someone go from not special to realizing how special they are.
So
are we saying,
what I'm hearing is that it's a coming of age story. Yes. Mom and I were both immediately.
I was just going to say, are we saying like coming of age? Or
Because I think you've just hit on why we both enjoy so many examples of this story. It's usually deployed in stories with some sort of magical, fantastical element, and it is a way to add basically a coming of age element to that, sort of intermix all of that, aha, there's a prophecy and now you have to sort of rise to it. But the actual real world thing is there's a prophecy that you're going to have to grow the fuck up and become an adult someday and defeat all the demons of taxes and shit, which is way less fun.
You've been chosen to get a real job. I hate this.
Yeah, I got the suckiest power.
Gainfully employed person.
Yep. Health insurance.
Okay, so we all sound like we have a generally positive idea about the Chosen One narrative. So I'm curious, and we've touched a little bit on this already, but what are some of the pitfalls, or what are some of the way that the Chosen One trope is used that you are not a fan of?
I think for me, the most obvious example, and this kind of ties back to my frustration with the way that the term Mary Sue is thrown around that I was talking about in the last episode, is that there is a very common trend in which you have a male chosen one who sort of bumbles around a bit, and an incredibly competent friend, female friend, who is there and like consistently does more of the work and then isn't the one who ultimately saves the day. Ultimately, the chosen dude saves the day. And because of that, again, this is back to the baggage elements of it, that how much of this is just this is good or bad and how much of this is my own baggage, whatever. But it is definitely a part of why I reacted so adversely to the idea of Ray as a Mary Sue. It's just like, this is a fucking Chosen One story that we have seen 1,000 times before, and suddenly the Chosen One is female and she's a Mary Sue. Like, no, fuck you. So those are my feelings on that.
I'm glad you brought that up because that was my number one point too. I've heard it called, and I don't know which of my friends brought this up, the Trinity syndrome.
The Matrix?
Because of the Matrix, yeah. Because for those of you who don't know the Matrix, like Neo is the chosen one of the story, but he's introduced to the world of the Matrix by Trinity, who's another character. She's like very competent, knows the entire world, like the virtual world, real world divide, and he just kind of bumbles in and is told he's the chosen one and ends up becoming the hero of the story and like revived by her kiss when he's about to die or things like that. And it epitomizes the idea that like the Lego movie does this too. So many movies happen to set up the story as there's this incredibly competent female character who knows the world, who has trained for years and years to become the thing and to actively work towards saving it. And then this idiot comes along who just happens to be the chosen one. And the only thing that she gives him is romantic approval at that point. She like reluctantly passes the torch to him because she's told that he is the chosen one. And then like the ending gets sealed with romantic approval and it's
Yep.
It's the worst.
So going back to all of our callings as the worst chosen ones that have to pay taxes and get real jobs, I feel like this is kind of akin to like training your new boss. And there's that element of the chosen one trope that is a bunch of competent people who know what they're doing, training somebody and equipping somebody who doesn't know what they're doing in order to move the story forward. And if it happened to me in real life, I would not be excited. In fiction, I'm like, yeah, chosen one, you go. Like, you go. You do that thing. You save the world. But absolutely, there's that part of me that can sit back and realize that that's really shitty for everyone else involved in this story.
And going off of that, my other frustration is when it's used in conjunction with a white savior story. So like Avatar, the James Cameron version, or Princess of Mars with John Carter, where the story sets up this protagonist, this white male protagonist most often, and goes into a world that's occupied by a racial other. And somehow, because of the white man's circumstance and bumbling abilities, somehow he can do all the things to save this community of people that have been involved in a conflict for centuries or decades and have been working towards defeating it by themselves. But the key that they needed was this outsider to come in and do the things that they were doing better, which is just ridiculous, like conquering the beast or, fighting the war for them or running their government for them.
That's actually the thing that I wrote down as my least favorite take on the chosen one is the white savior trope. And I don't know that I would necessarily call her a chosen one. I don't think we have all the information yet, but my example was Daenerys Targaryen, and just how much her story, especially in the last couple of seasons, played that angle.
I mean, they also gave like the worst possible visual representation. What was it, season 4 finale, where they're like panning up. It's like the aerial shot of her being lifted up, and you just pan out and see just this sea of brown people lifting and like spinning the whitest girl who ever lived around in circles. Just like, what? The fact that nobody saw that and thought, maybe this is not a great idea. The number of people who work on Game of Thrones, the number of people who saw that and were like, yep, this is great.
This is a great image right now.
This is the perfect image to have as the last image that we leave people with for a year. Whatever. Both of these complaints speak to kind of the same thing, which is questions about who gets to be chosen. And that is ultimately one of potentially many ways that this can go awry, and is a problem beyond the scope of just this particular trope. But I think it is worth considering who we let be chosen in our stories and how we react to different people being chosen, like why it's acceptable when one person is in that position versus somebody else and whatnot.
I think also it can be a pitfall in story reasons when we're talking about who gets chosen and why, when you're talking about the framework of the story and the magic of the story or the lore of the world. And sometimes it starts to fall apart around the idea of, okay, why was this person chosen? How were they chosen? And some of the flimsiness of the world can start to show up there as well. And one of the things I think that also can be a pitfall when you're talking about the chosen one narrative, and it probably goes back to what you guys were saying where you enjoy it more where there's a twist, is that there are some of the same beats that get hit in a chosen one narrative, because you have the choosing and inevitably the part of the story where they're like, but why me? And then you go on from there and, build towards the part where they're like, hooray, me! And, they win the thing. So it's the notes that are hit when you're talking about a chosen one story can all be very, very the same. So you really have to be careful about that in a chosen one story. Or maybe you like that. That's what you want to consume all the time, always. But I think part of the reason that people struggle with the chosen one narrative is because of it's overdone or overexposure, and because those are the notes that are consistently hit.
Yeah, I feel like going into a chosen one story, you know the ending. They're going to win.
Right.
That's how it works. Whether they sacrifice themselves to win or and that's where some of the twists come in, is how exactly that ending happens. But inherent to the chosen one trope is that they are the person who's most fit to save the world. So the world is going to be saved, most likely. I can only think of like Cabin in the Woods, where it kind of the world ended instead of being saved.
Oh, yeah. I was like, wait, what happened? I know I've seen this movie multiple times.
Fire,
yeah. That's, yep.
Yeah.
Yep, all the monsters and, yeah.
Yeah,
fire.
and I'm sure there are others, but if you don't acknowledge that this is a trope and that those beats that you were mentioning, Mari, need to be hit, then it can feel really stale. But you have to kind of embrace the fact that those beats do need to be hit and then come up with an interesting way to do that, or come up with an interesting story to surround them. So even if people expect the moment of self-doubt that the protagonist is going to have, you have to make that interesting somehow, like delve into that in a different way that people might not have before.
I think the other thing about it too, and this is not a question of whether or not you hit those same notes, but an important thing, I think, in terms of making it effective, is that on your journey to hit all of those notes, the character needs to earn it somehow. Obviously, they didn't earn being chosen in the first place. But if they at no point ascend in some way, if they don't make any sort of real measurable progress towards earning their victory, then it's just like, that is also a thing that is ultimately going to make it feel very stale and flat and ineffective.
So there's one other thing that comes with the chosen one that I always find pretty fascinating. And I think it happens a lot when you have a chosen one, and kind of going back to that whole idea of the Trinity syndrome, or where you have an ensemble cast but then a chosen one. And I call it Harry Potter syndrome, because Harry Potter is the one that sticks out in my mind, but I'm sure that there are much older examples. But it's when you have the chosen one, but they are everybody's least favorite character, or people consistently will choose others above that person as their favorite. So if you ask somebody their favorite character in Harry Potter, 9 times out of 10, they do not choose Harry Potter. And I think that happens a lot with Buffy. People never say Buffy. They always choose some of the side characters. No. So are there other examples you can think of? And why do you think that happens to our chosen one characters?
My guess is that because the story is usually about the chosen one, there is more that you get to fill in as an audience member in terms of the supporting characters. And because the supporting characters don't have to do all of the plot heavy lifting, they basically only get to exist for fun reasons. In the case of Harry Potter, Ron and Hermione are basically there for everything, and so they also do a fair amount of plot heavy lifting, but like the twins and Luna and all of these other characters only exist peripherally to the plot. I don't want to downplay them. And I feel the same anxiety that I felt last week talking about Star Wars, where I'm now treading into very popular territory, things that people have strong opinions on, and somebody's going to fight me for downplaying them. I love Luna. I also love Luna. However, she gets to make appearances that I think are much more, fun. Like, Harry has to be there for moments in the story that are maybe less fun, but that are about just getting us from A to B. So that is one reason that I suspect that happens.
This is an interesting thing because it is making me question a statement that I made like less than half an hour ago, which is that the reason why I like Chosen One stories is because it makes like you feel special. But if there are these stories where you hate the protagonist, the special person, and you like their side characters more, why do we like the Chosen One stories? Like, I still love Harry Potter. Also, Harry Potter's not my favorite character. So clearly, not because I relate to him. So I'm just processing that now.
I think people tie in the Chosen One with their stories so tightly that they don't automatically separate them out and consider them a separate entity. We recapped Buffy on the blog, and people would often talk about either not liking her or Buffy not being their favorite character. And when you confront them about this, like, no, but like the entire story is hers. That's kind of their point, is that the story belongs to Buffy, and it's so meshed together, the entire process that we go through in the whole story, that they almost view her in a separate category. And so it goes back to what Nicole was saying, that all of these other side characters are almost more fun for them to consume, or a little more divorced from what the action is than maybe a Harry Potter or a Buffy.
Yes. The Buffy example is one where it really breaks my heart, too, because I love her so much. And it always makes me so sad when people who enjoy that show are ambivalent about Buffy, the character, because of their love for Willow or whoever else. I'm just so sad because Buffy is a great example of a chosen one who routinely, repeatedly earns it, is constantly earning her victories. She was chosen, yes, but that doesn't mean that her victories are also just given to her. Buffy is also an example of, sort of separate from this conversation, but also an example of an interesting kind of turning of the trope on its head, because a big part of the lore is also that the Slayers, who are chosen very young, typically don't live very long, and she lives much longer, in part because she is consistently relying on this larger network of people. And that's same is true also of Harry, I guess. But anyway, I also find this tendency to dislike the main character in these stories to be very, very fascinating. And I wish I had a better explanation. That is as close as I can get to a theory of why people frequently dislike the Chosen One themselves while loving the Chosen One's story.
I think the Chosen One also, going back to what I said before, has to hit that note at some point of, but I don't wanna. And I think that people resent them for that, or else I hear both Harry and Buffy being called whiny sometimes, or just kind of going through the process of coming to terms with their chosen identity, I think is something that people hold over or against the Chosen One. So, but whatever.
Whatever, those people are wrong, and they're the ones who have the worst opinions. So,
bye. Going off of that, too, I feel like with the Chosen One being the most developed character oftentimes, or if we spend time alone with a character, it's going to be them. They have a chance for their flaws to be more developed than any other character. And so when it comes to things like saying Harry is whiny or Harry is something like doesn't appreciate his friends enough or makes dumb decisions or things like that, we dwell more in that space than we do with other characters. And so it's easier for people to list out things that they don't like about these main characters because we've just spent more time with them altogether. So kind of the inverse of what you were saying about the side characters are underdeveloped or leave something to the imagination, whereas the main characters are so grittily developed that there's more to cling on to potentially dislike.
Now that we've talked about the Chosen One trope and some of the things that we like and dislike about it, I'd like to get, we've mentioned a bunch of media, but I'd like to get from your perspective, what are some of your favorite Chosen One stories and what are some of your least favorite Chosen One stories?
I guess I'll go first. I wanted to go last because I had a really hard time coming up with least favorites.
Okay.
I feel like you guys are going to start talking about your least favorites and I'm going to be like, oh yeah, I fucking hate that one too. But at present, I actually don't really, I honestly can't think of any that jump out at me in terms of really bad examples of least favorites. I did briefly think The Maze Runner, but it's mostly because I remember actively fucking hating The Maze Runner. Like every time I think about it, I feel angry in my body. Like it's not just like that I'm like, oh, that was bad. I feel this like physically overtaken by the rage that I felt while reading that very bad book. And I honestly cannot dissect or pick apart anything about what was effective or ineffective about that Chosen One because this was several years ago and all I remember is rage. So that's my one and only submission, my one and only offering for bad Chosen One stories. Things that I love. So we already talked about Harry Potter and Buffy. Buffy is probably my single favorite in terms of the trope of the Chosen One. It's one of my favorites in a general sense. It is probably my favorite use of Chosen One storytelling, again, because of the ways that it plays with it constantly. And, pretty much right out of the gate, that in the second season, all of a sudden there's a second set of Chosen Ones, and it's just constantly finding very interesting ways to play with it. Again, she is constantly earning her victories and not just being given them because she was chosen. She repeatedly dies to save the world. She's just so good, okay? Buffy. My other big example, though, that I want to mention is His Dark Materials, which they're my favorite books. Also an interesting use of the idea of a chosen one, because Lyra being chosen to fulfill this destiny, one of the things that the story repeatedly hits on is the idea that she can only fulfill this destiny if she doesn't know that she's fulfilling it. And because her whole purpose as a, her whole destiny is to sort of rid people of destiny is kind of the premise, I guess, as it very simplistic explanation of the premise, but as it relates to this trope, I think that's a fundamental thing that is happening there. And I think that that is an interesting way to deploy the idea of a chosen one. So those are my favorites.
I had trouble picking favorites because I think I remember enjoying a lot of media that involves chosen one tropes in various degrees. And so I actually had to think back at what kind of stories specifically focused on one character. I really loved Moana, the recent Disney movie, and I think she falls into the chosen one trope because one of the very first scenes of her is her as a baby she returns a baby sea turtle to the ocean, and the ocean offers her up a shell in return, essentially. And she has to go on this quest. She is nominated by the ocean to go on this quest. And at the heart of her story is not this big battle, which is what you kind of think it will be, because she has to recruit the demigod Maui and find his hook, and and it's set up as this big lava monster that they're going to have to face. But at the heart of her story is heart, because what she's doing is returning the heart of a goddess back to her. And she resolves the plot by using the thing that the ocean saw in her in the first place, which is compassion, and taking a step to just care about a life other than her own. And I thought that was just really sweet.
Beautiful.
And beautiful, because usually these things involve a lot more a final battle or a really tough decision. But for Moana, it was a journey of self-discovery and knowing that what she needed was in herself the whole time.
So I'm going to end this call and go play Moana right after this. That was beautiful.
Yeah. And then one that I could think of that kind of plays on the trope a little bit, in the same vein as Nicole was saying, I really like it when tropes get twisted. The cartoon Gravity Falls is one of my very favorite cartoons and pieces of media. And it takes place in Oregon, in a forest, I think, a fictional town. And it's these two kids who go to their great uncle Stan's mystery shack, which is essentially a tourist trap on the side of the road. And they find out that all this weird stuff in the forest actually is kind of supernatural, and there's a reason for that, and that's what they're doing, is uncovering this mystery. But it's twin siblings that are doing this, and so it's just a really cute show with a lot of heart, and it takes the chosen one trope and turns it into kind of the chosen many to resolve it, where it starts out as one kid. He finds this book. He's exploring the supernatural. During the process of this, a world-ending spirit called Bill Cipher comes up and starts to take over the entire town of Gravity Falls and turns the world into basically a confusing hellscape. And the way that the conflict gets resolved is he ends up essentially recruiting everyone who has played a role in his story throughout these 2 seasons of a summer. And together, they save the world. And I think that's just, I don't know, I really like coming-of-age stories and found family stories. And I think I liked the twist on this one where there's someone who you think is the protagonist of the story, and the friends aren't only there as support, but they also play a critical role in the end of the story and resolving it. So those are the 2 that I could come up with. That was right in the feels.
Do you have any least favorites that you had?
Oh, I think I mentioned them. Mostly James Cameron's Avatar, I think, because I studied it in one of my classes, and I just realized that the white savior complex is so frustrating to me. The idea that a group of people will be painted they're just a backdrop. They're a setting in which he can become the chosen one. I don't even know the protagonist's name. It's I think it's John. It's the most generic white man's name. There are things that I don't like we were talking about with the Lego movie. I think I enjoyed it thoroughly, but it uses this variation of the trope that I don't like. But that didn't take away my enjoyment of the jokes in that movie. Yeah, I couldn't think of any chosen one stories that I just viscerally hated.
That is a good example, though, of how a badly deployed trope isn't necessarily a death knell for, a good story. You can still tell a very good story with a badly deployed trope. Mari, what about you?
For me, I think some of my favorite media that uses the Chosen One trope, I've got at the top Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is also an animated series. And I think it did something very fun with this idea of the Chosen One, because at the beginning, there is a Chosen One kind of in a Buffy-esque way where there's one for every certain generation, and it's almost like a reincarnation of this force or this power. And the Chosen One at the beginning, Avatar, he gets frozen into like a stasis, and so the world is missing him for a while, and things get very, very bad, and two siblings happen across him, and that starts kind of their adventure story in trying to defeat the evil that is now ruling the world. So this idea that the Chosen One, should have been training and should have been protecting the world for this whole time, but he's still a kid now because he was frozen in this iceberg basically for all of this time. So starting from square one and doing the whole thing out of time for him, out of order, and basically coming back to a world where everybody that he knew and he loved is dead now because it's been so much time. So I thought that was a really neat way to start his Chosen One story, and also I just love it and I love the characters and I think everybody should watch it. So that's definitely one of my favorites. Nicole gushed about Buffy, but I have to just add my +1 there as well. I love her entire story. I love her as a main character. I just said I love her entire story. Those are rose-colored glasses because I hated a portion of her story.
There's some portions of her story that I really hated. But one girl in all the world to defeat the vampires, okay?
Yeah. But in general, I enjoyed that story because I love Buffy. And even when the writing was hitting false notes for her story, I think I hated it so badly because I was so invested as Buffy as the main character and as the Chosen One that I felt the injustice of what the plot and the writing was doing to her. So she was definitely somebody that I can root for and that I still have very loving feelings for, even though her story didn't always get it right.
And we have many thousands of words about our feelings on Buffy the Vampire Slayer over at SnarkSquad.com.
Including all the ways they got it wrong. Another one that I really enjoy is Frodo from The Lord of the Rings. And I like that he starts as well in this group, that he's got that idea of like many people helping him towards an end goal, but that drops away for him a lot. And he ends up having to do a lot of things on his own or just him and one other person. So you feel that he has earned it because even though he has that support system, at the end of the day, he earns it and he has to do a lot of the heavy lifting by himself. So I know that that's not a story that everybody can get into, and it took me like 3 reads before I was like, I think I like this, but I
do. Same. Yeah. It took me a while to get into Lord of the Rings. It's so dense.
It is. You got to get through like all the flora and the fauna and then be like, is that you, Frodo? But
that's my
once
sticking
you get
point.
there.
That's always my high fantasy sticking point, is I just don't care about the flora and the fauna. I have the edited version without all of that. Thank you.
Yeah, but in the meat of that, there's a Chosen One, Nicole.
Yeah.
You just gotta peer through, like do some bushwhacking, and you'll find it, and you'll love it.
Okay, I have one more favorite. I know I gave a lot, and this one is, she's not so much a chosen one in the beginning of her story, but I think as you go on with her story, the story did really interesting things discussing what it meant for her to be the chosen one at the head of a revolution, basically. But Katniss, she self-selected into the Hunger Games, and she did that because she was protecting her sister. But then as her story progresses, she gets chosen as this figurehead for the rebellion and the revolution. And she has to deal a lot with people treating her that way and treating her like a chosen one. And we get to see not only how she deals with it, but part of what makes the story stick with me so much is that at the end it shows us the backlash or the fallout of what happened to this person after she was a chosen one and after the mission was completed. And probably like the most heartbreaking end to a story ever for me was the end of Mockingjay, where I was like, nope. Why is the right? Like, she gave so much, and then you just see her at the end of her story, and it's not completely hopeless, but it was a bit of a downer to me, at least. So, but I enjoyed what it said overall about a chosen one.
I agree. It's a downer, but I think it is a downer that is part of the efficacy of the story. Like, the story, it couldn't have ended any other way. She doesn't get to just go be happy and peaceful after all of that. It's interesting that you mentioned that, because I thought about that too, but I wasn't sure the degree to which she counted because she self-selected into this position. It's an interesting one because she takes on the role of the chosen one in terms of the way the story is structured, but she's not chosen by like magic, as is so often the case in these stories, which is sort of an interesting twist on the idea of the chosen one.
Yeah, I agree. I thought about her too. So clearly she was in the back of all of our minds. But I think that the twist in her story is so fitting with the world that she is in. So in her world, which is oversaturated by media propping children up to do things, she is a child propped up as the head of a revolution. And I think that twist on the chosen one story, or that flavor of the chosen one story, it's a really good example of how the trope catered to the world in a way that was really, really effective, whether or not it's 100% the trope that we're used to, but it played against the same beats in a really interesting way.
Yeah, I agree. Mari, did you have any examples that you really hated?
I tried very hard to think of examples that I hated, and I do have one. The Charmed witches from Charmed. They are often called the chosen ones, and there's this whole idea that they're like super powerful witches. And I guess I probably should have mentioned this when we were talking about pitfalls of the trope, but part of the reason that I really don't like them, apart from the idea that they're in this show that's really badly written and badly acted, like they just were not set up for any kind of winning, really. But part of what really annoys me about them is that the amount of plot armor that they have on, which I think is probably something that people have against chosen ones, is that if it gets to a point where you should have died so long ago and we're no longer believing that story, that can be frustrating. And that is 100% the Charmed witches, because they make terrible choices. They should have died ages ago. I don't understand why they still are coming out on top, but they are, because they are the chosen ones. So I don't like that show, and I don't like those characters.
One example that I did have that I forgot on examples of things that I dislike, but because I like this overall, but it has some dubious use of chosen one stories, is Battlestar Galactica, which has a few different iterations of chosen ones throughout the story. And I'm not a fan of any of them, of the idea of any of them being chosen. Baltar's entire story, his whole dynamic with Caprica 6 is this idea that she believes that he is chosen, and I just don't like his whole story. I think, like, basically his entire narrative throughout all of the seasons is one of my least favorite parts of it. And sort of his role in the ending is something that I'm kind of meh on. And it is ultimately because of a just very weirdly deployed chosen one thing. There's just a lot of like, I don't know, now things worked this way. It doesn't make sense. I don't know why the fuck you're still making these choices and endangering all these people's lives, but the hot lady whispering into your ear at night says you should, so whatever. I don't know. It's been a while since I've seen it also, which is the other reason that I don't know how to more effectively talk about it. That's another one where like I have a memory of a feeling more than I do memories of specifics. Just a memory of a feeling that every time Baltar was on screen, I didn't like it.
Well, like in a similar way, I haven't seen Battlestar Galactica. I've talked about it academically. So
this is like last week with the Star Wars episode.
This is the problem with media people. We have a lot of references, but have not seen everything. But it sounds from my understanding of it, the deployment of chosen one tropes for different characters for different reasons is similar to how Game of Thrones is structured, where there's like a soap opera cast of characters, and there are specific instances where chosen one ideas are deployed. So like Stannis Baratheon is one example with like the Lady of the Light. I don't know all the words
Red
for
Lady.
it. Red Lady. So Stannis Baratheon and the Red Lady choosing him as the leader. Like everyone has their leader of Westeros that they are nominating and that they think is the chosen one. And so I feel like this trope peeks its head out in a lot of these stories. Like Daenerys and Khal Drogo's baby was supposed to be a chosen one. Bran, yeah, is also has some elements of the chosen one story and some. I don't know exactly where I was going with this, but I think it's a story. I just had an idea.
On, yes. Adventures in podcasting.
Yeah.
I had a fragment of an idea, and I was just going to start talking and hope that the rest of the idea came to me.
But it didn't. I got through the sentence, and then the idea was still unfinished. I think, yes, I have like a general feeling about Game of Thrones is that this is an interesting story, and I think part of it is because it plays with the chosen one idea in that a lot of people in the story think that their ruler is the chosen one. But underneath all that, there are obviously like Daenerys and Jon Snow are the chosen two of the world. Again, it's not like a straightforward chosen one story.
Right.
So I don't know. And it's like not my absolute favorite piece of media, but I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I wrote Game of Thrones down with a question mark too, because I was like, we don't know where it's going yet, because it's still constantly playing with it in ways that make it hard to pin down for a conversation like this, because, for example, it is not that clear who is the chosen one in all of these instances. Honestly, Bran to me sticks out as the most concrete example of a chosen one. He's clearly not chosen to end up on the throne, but he was chosen to go on his weird journey north of the wall and to become a tree, basically. Yep. become a raven. A bird. Sorry, yeah. To connect with a tree and become a bird, whatever.
It's all magical. It doesn't matter.
I think Game of Thrones is interesting, though, because at the beginning you get this idea that people are fighting for the throne. And so that doesn't necessarily speak to a chosen one, but as we've progressed in the story, you have Bran. But then you also have the prophecy about the prince who was promised, and how last season it was like, or princess, we flipped the script on you, yeah. So it's kind of it's like alluding to this idea that even though the throne is open for the taking, that there might be some kind of larger calling or prophecy or some chosen one that would bring peace to whatever, the places, the nations.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, ultimately, the throne is a distraction for the war with the White Walkers. And that's what the show has been trying to tell us since season 1. But everyone's like, no, the throne!
Yeah.
When there are whispers of, well, there's also a zombie apocalypse happening soon, so.
The Vox video about how it's all an analogy for climate change is one of my favorite things. And I can't shake it every time I watch it. I'm just like, yep, this is just like us. Humanity's going to be wiped out. We can't get our shit together. And we're all going to die. Great.
The good news is that there's a chosen one somewhere, maybe.
One of us working our adult lives, working our jobs in these.
Paying your taxes.
Yep.
That's only today. Someday. Tomorrow, we're saving the world from climate change.
Great. Mm-hmm. Okay. I have one last example. We've been talking about these big, grandiose stories, fun, magic, fantasy stuff, but another delightful use of the chosen one trope in a show that was really just all about meta storytelling, and so this was like a very deliberate use of it. But on Community, Troy was the chosen one to be, what was it? It's the air conditioning school.
Air conditioning school.
Yes, chosen to be the air conditioning repairman. Because he was so good at it, and I don't know. I don't really have anything else to say besides that was
so fucking good. Like, that show includes every single trope, so they had to do it. And I just love Troy as a character, too, so I'm happy that he was the chosen one for this ridiculous side plot of an underground air conditioning school within the community college.
Yep. That seems like a fun note on which to end this.
There are ways to do it well.
Yes. There are so many different ways that you can deploy the chosen one trope, including the chosen air conditioning repairman. Turns out.
Yeah, I think that is actually kind of deep in a way. Like, people... I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna write a thesis about this. The idea of the chosen one is oftentimes so linked to these grandiose stories. And so people think that to do it well, they have to create this like more epic, higher stakes, more engaged and more in-depth world to be even original with the chosen one trope. But it doesn't have to be that. Like all these examples that we've listed use the chosen one trope in very different settings and in very different ways. And from something as simple as like being chosen to be an air conditioning repairman, that was a great story. That was like such a good moment of TV.
He was chosen like the rest of us to just have a steady paying job and
yeah, maybe that's why so relatable. He's chosen to be an adult.
He's paying taxes too.
But like, that's a compelling story.
Yeah.
Because it's slightly different. And so you don't need to, I feel like people overthink tropes. And I know I overthink tropes when I'm trying to create a story. But you just have to like find a tiny twist that people can sink their teeth into. And then it's and then I will watch your media and enjoy it.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Sari, for joining us this week to talk to us about Chosen One stories and on this fun little experiment in podcasting. If you enjoyed this, let us know over on the blog at SnarkSquad.com or on Twitter at Snark_squad. I am at Sweeney Says.
You can find me at My Name is Marines.
I'm at C.E. Riley.
And yeah, we look forward to hearing from you. Except if you hated it, then don't talk to us.
Yeah, don't at me.
I think we've found a way to work the words don't at me
into every episode.
It's our unofficial tagline. Great.
Good.
Thanks for joining us. See you next week.